I'm going to open with a digital story that I made in order to sort of understand my own connection to this work. And as you know, stories are an important part of this work, so I think learning how to tell stories is one way to start. I don't want to think about losing my grandfather. His stories are how my family interprets itself.
I took off running from the garage toward the house.
How we weave meaning out of the chaotic threads of history. He told me he fell in love with the nape of my grandmother's neck from a few rows behind her in the church choir. I exist because of that church choir. In his stories, there are the refugee families they housed from various conflicts. At my grandmother's service in 2001, many of those former refugees attended. It dawned on me, those were not just other people's stories. For some, asking to hear stories is not quite so simple. The Umian Hill tribes arrived on the West Coast, having fled persecution by the Laotian and Vietnamese governments for their alliance with the U.S. Now they have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Many cannot speak the languages of their elders. These grandchildren now worry about passing on the Umian language and culture to their own children. This is a pattern that's repeating itself all across the world. People are being sold the story that their heritage is irrelevant, out of date. And we are believing it. For many of us, there's an opposing view. When we ignore our elders, when we don't see them, we lose our way, ourselves. So I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for giving me this time to present the Aikuma project to you. I'm working in refugee and immigrant communities that are working towards enriching their daily lives by staying connected to their language and culture. And at the Aikuma project, we want all communities who are doing this kind of work to have the best tools at their disposal. So that's why I'm here. It's also a privilege to present in this particular audience because most of the work has been done in Aboriginal Australian communities in South America and in Asia, and this is the first presentation to this audience in the US. So we really want to hear about your needs in terms of naturalistic spoken materials for learning language. I've learned a lot from the presenters that have gone before me, and I'm so honored to be in their midst. The plan for today is 2 stories, 3 questions, and 4 scenarios. You've already heard one of the stories. The 3 questions are my way of asking for information from you during this presentation, so I'll turn to you in a moment, and we'll have our first question. I'll ask you to speak to your neighbor and answer a question that I'm posing about language learning. I figure you guys are the experts in the room. So I'll have you turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself if you haven't already, and find a little bit about them, and then I invite you to think about this question. So what kinds of resources are needed for language learning? We've talked about this a lot, so this might be a good review of all the other sessions we've had. So think about everything from beginner students to advanced students. What are all the kinds of resources you need? And you don't need a scribe or anything. I'll just have people holler it out. So turn to the folks next to you. I'll give you a couple of minutes and come up with all the resources you think are needed for language learning. Okay, so I know that's not a lot of time, but I'd love to hear back from you. I think you probably have a lot of stuff on the tip of your tongue. So raise your hand. What resources are needed for language learning? And I'm going to try and record as you share with me. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Mic in the front and then to the
Okay.
back.
Our table said that we need, first of all, fluent speakers within that given language. We need a curriculum. We need the elders that give us the resources to go by. And we need the interested students.
I think I missed one. Did I?
No, you have.
I got it? Okay. Cool.
Was there someone back here?
There was someone
Yeah.
in the back.
They took a few of our answers.
That's okay.
But we said that you also need somebody to talk to or talk with. And you need some sort of activity or a conversation starter.
Cool. Those are good.
Some of the things that we had were an indigenous land base, the access to nature, your land, language retention, again, the interest, and the elderly.
Did you say one about language retention?
Yeah. Yes, some base of language retention to be able to teach.
Couple more?
Our table decided that we need, which was already mentioned before, a lot of input from the elders. And curriculum based, however, it's got to be visually, it's got to be, you have to like see it, hear it, and in that area. And then again, we need, for resources, we need a lot of funding because we have a huge tribal land base, and to reach everybody, you don't know what the Navajo language is. Navajo reservation is consisting of. It's so huge. So
Yeah.
to reach the young children, the people out there. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank you.
We thought it was important to have people who are all operating on the same page, like with the same vision and the same goals.
Thousands and thousands of hours of dedication. There's no way around it. To really respect the funding question, I wanted to add that there's been other successful revitalization where all it was the fluent speaker, the elder, the grandma, the grandpa, living with young people and only speaking the language. And all that costs is time and dedication, and how that was effective. But yeah, I mean, every single thing is needed, funding, anything. But just to say that it can happen other ways too.
Cool. I added cohabitation as the natural way of learning language. Awesome. That's a great list. Does anyone have anything they're burning to add? Oh, there's one more.
Commitment,
Awesome.
passion for wanting to learn
Yes.
or to teach it.
Great. Those are awesome. Thank you for talking together. I had one on my list, which you kind of cover in a lot of ways, but stories and oral literature. That, of course, goes without saying almost. So maybe I'd add that to this list just to make it explicit. And I love the input from elders. We're going to hit a slide that we already saw yesterday from Derek Baxter's presentation, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, there are a lot of different resources that are needed, and Aikuma is not a silver bullet. I don't think any technology is. I really like the theme that's coming out of today's presentations, that technology is not going to solve any problems without all of these things first, and planning as well, as we heard from Dr. Cajete this morning. But I think Aikuma is a flexible tool that maybe can fill some gaps or help fill some gaps, and it allows for a lot of creativity. So I'm going to start with the second story. This is about where Aikuma comes from, and it comes from a simple insight. This insight won't be surprising to anyone in this room. But linguists have been doing field work for for over 100 years. We saw some this morning, the Jesuit priests who are pseudo-linguists. But we've finally learned, I think, in the linguistics community. I should mention, I have a background in linguistics and community organizing and technology, so that's kind of how I come to this work. But the best linguists, the best people to do documentation work are community linguists. And what do I mean by community linguists? They may be someone who is trained in transcription or translation, but primarily they're someone from the heritage or indigenous community. And they really have an interest in doing some kind of documentation of stories, of prayer, of whatever they deem interesting, of wisdom. And in this era of this global language crisis that I set up at the beginning, we need more and more community linguists to be doing this work. This work shouldn't wait around for linguists. Linguists aren't even the best people to do it sometimes unless they're coming from the community. So if we don't do this work now, I loved the Miami presentation because I remember another Miami person, Wes Leonard, at the Breath of Life conference talk about languages not being extinct, but they can go dormant, as Daryl said this morning. So how do we ensure that they don't go extinct and actually they can maintain dormancy if that's really what has to happen? We can do lots of recordings, and unlike the days of only pen and paper, we now have recording devices. So this may be easier and easier if you have an elder by your side. So Stephen Bird, who is my colleague, who led the team that created this project called Aikuma, it's an app, which I'm going to share with you in a bit. Stephen and a couple of other linguists realized this insight about community linguists doing the best linguistics work, best documentary work. And they thought about this, and he decided he was going to do an experiment. So he took 4 digital voice recorders. This was in 2009. And he took them to the highlands in a village in Papua New Guinea and trained a few community members to use them to do recordings, to do translations, and then he left for 2 weeks, and they went off and did their work. And when he came back, they had done incredible work. They had captured very beautiful stories and done great translations. And so he decided, what happens if we do this at scale in a room in Papua New Guinea of 30 people? Actually, it's very similar to this room. There might be 30 languages. So let's do it with more. So in 2010, they took 100 digital voice recorders to these folks, trained them, and then let them go. Everything was noted down in paper notebooks at that time, and sometimes recordings were made on one device and the translations were made on a different device. So this is where the technical bits make a big difference, because those things could easily be separated from each other and from the written down notation. This X translation goes with Y recording. So this really had to be done in communities. It's been tested since in other places, like I mentioned, but taking these technologies to communities where people weren't using technologies every day or sitting at desk jobs 8 hours a day meant that the technology had to really be designed in a way that people could use it. These were mostly subsistence farmers, and sometimes that attitude that we might have here in this room, I know people don't consider themselves tech savvy sometimes, but just that idea that when we have technology all the time we think, I'll just mess around until it works. That was not the case so much here, and people were like, I don't know what this is doing, and they gave it back to the person, to Stephen. So this proved challenging, but it was really important learning. So these devices proved complicated. Everything that might have been simple, they thought, was complicated, keeping the recordings together. And at the same time, they were noticing an increase in mobile phones. Everybody had one in their pocket. So why not make recording and translating software for everyone and make it free, importantly. So that's what they did. And importantly, I want to mention that Aikuma is based on the idea that a lot of languages that are threatened in the world may have a writing system, but the writing system may not be in frequent use. If you look at statistics from the internet, there's the whole internet, so much of the internet is taken over by English, and there's not a lot of writing systems here documenting the culture that we're all producing in other languages. So this Aikuma app has a simple set of controls that allows recording and translating oral language only. No writing is necessary. And the translation is done manually. I think I want to be clear about that. You still have to do the work of translating yourself. There's no automatic translation that will make this easier. So I'm going to show you a demo in a bit, but first I'm going to ask you another question to discuss with your neighbors. And we'll take you into the classroom now, or the language program, or the context in which lots of people in your community are studying their language. So remember the time you were there. Think about how the spoken language was used. Was it easy? Was it difficult? You probably have a wide range of speakers that have different levels of comprehension. Were students able to understand the spoken language? Did they struggle a bit? So I'm going to have you take another minute to turn to your neighbors and answer this question. What are some of the positives of using spoken language in I said classroom or language program, a language learning context? And what are some of the challenges that come along with it? So I want to kind of get those ideas out in the room together. So take a moment, turn to your neighbors, and discuss this question. It looks like there's some great conversations happening. Let's come back together and share with each other a little bit about what we're talking about in our groups. So, do we have any reports back? What are some of the can we start with positives? I think it'll just make it easier for me to format this stuff. So, any positives of using the spoken language in a language learning context? Here we go. Yeah, go ahead.
Positives are like for peer reinforcement, peer support.
Cool.
So we took it a little more to mean the difference between writing versus speaking.
Okay,
And
that's
so
great.
So in our sense, it was one idea was that you'd actually be able to hear how people actually speak stuff and how it's actually pronounced.
Does that capture it? Something like that? Okay. But maybe it's more than pronunciation, too, how people actually speak. So sentence formation and, okay. How about other features of language? Other positives. There's so much there in that one point that maybe that covers a lot of the ground. We can do some challenges, too.
there's no reinforcement of the language in the community or within homes.
So you would want to learn, you would want to use it, but it's hard to get access to. There's no reinforcement in the home. Okay. Yeah.
In our community, we still have enough people who speak fluently, but nobody is, or I'll say, put it this way, no one is using us. No one is asking us to go and maybe go into the daycare where there's children, because yesterday it says that the children ages, I guess, babies on up, they need to hear the language in order to learn it, and we're there, but no one has. We haven't gotten to that point where anyone is using we old folks to do that, and I think the challenge is maybe the department heads need to come to these sessions so that they can get it, because it seems to be like I see it as a how do I say this? Convincing each others where we're at with this language, but we at this table we all speak, and we're saying that, you know, we're old and we're not going to be around too long, maybe, and so our knowledge is just being wasted, and we're here to be used and for teaching a language, and we're not that skilled in technology. But how do we learn the language? We didn't have technology when we learned the language.
Right.
And that's, in my opinion, we need to look at that. We need to go back to how it was. And one of the ways, again, like to repeat myself, is to be in those positions where we're going to be used or asked to use the language, to speak the language or teach the language.
Yeah. Thank you. So can I add a positive too, which is, you know, if you were able to go into the classroom, it's like natural language learning, or something like that. Like if you can be in the daycare, if you can be in the schools, then that would be easier than reading and writing and drilling in the grammar, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna add one.
Ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Wendy here said that there's not a lot of times there's not enough knowledge of the language to really carry it forward, even among the language teachers. And going off that, I'd say that, you know, there's been a lot of studies, a lot of, you know, work done on language acquisition, and it's basically the only time it's ever learned is when it's spoken at the home, when it's the only language for like 4 to 8 hours a day. So I think it's amazing that there's so many speakers here, you know, and that the greatest impact someone could have is just like that young boy that was shown in Finding Nemo with their grandma and their mom only speaking in the language. That'll go farther than anything that could happen in a classroom.
Yeah. 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 These are great. You have another? Go ahead.
When you have speakers that pronounce things differently from different regions, trying to learn is sometimes difficult because you may not say it according to the way they feel it should be spoken.
If I say figuring out how to deal with linguistic diversity, I mean, deal with sounds like it's a problem. It's not really a problem, but it's still, you need to manage how you learn. Okay. Is there another?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
For the positive,
yeah.
I speak or teach the Navajo language, and I feel that there's lots of programs out there, and we don't share. So we have a large school, and maybe if we could at least come to a consensus and use the same program, maybe that will help. And then also, as far as teaching, like vocabulary or something, I think it should be natural and not be out there and test them, and just let it come. Maybe about the first elementary years, I think it should just be natural, and then with clarity, and not so much let them find or feel their way for definitions.
Okay. So at a young age too. Yeah.
One of the positives is the kids are really smart. They're like sponges compared to adults.
Yeah.
And they're gonna learn a lot faster and easier than the adults do.
Perfect. I think, can I leave it with natural language learning at a young age? Does that kind of capture it? Something like that? Yeah. Okay, we'll take one more, and then we'll keep going. Thank you.
Good morning. The only negative part, I think, that has maybe somehow not very beneficial to our language learning to our children is the institutional learning that's placed in our communities doesn't have a placement or some sort of resource for a fluent child to come into an institution at kindergarten to continue that language experience from K to 5 maybe. So kind of say she or he is a fluent speaker coming in, and then it stops there.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of I have experienced that, and so I think that's the state that we reside in's fault, or it's the federal government's fault, where that has never been initiated to change. So that's, I think, somehow it's in the institution's downfall, and where as a grandparent and the parents have their own natural way of speaking to their children, but when it gets to an institution, there's a big fall of language.
Yeah. So no support in the institutional settings, and as you mentioned, the broader continued educational oppression that affects these communities. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges associated with using spoken language, whether it's even possible to use spoken language in the classroom setting, whether there's collaboration among people who could collaborate, how to put the right knowledge together to create programs at the right ages, to make use of all the resources like the elders who are fluent speakers who might be supporting daycare programs or young kids in school. So these are some of the challenges that you're facing in this work. I would add another one. It's maybe one about sort of the students who are just beginning, a little bit of lack of confidence or shyness about practicing. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with someone here who said, there's a feeling sometimes that if, you belong to this community, what's wrong with you? How come you don't speak this language yet? So it might be hard to feel like, oh, I'll just wing it. I'm going to make all the mistakes I'm going to make, which is sometimes necessary in getting better and practicing as much as possible. So there can be that shyness or lack of speaker confidence there too. So in a moment, I'm going to move into showing you the demo of how the technology actually works. But first, we'll show a video of somebody using it. This is a guy who speaks Tembe, which is a language of the Brazilian Amazon. And if you don't know Portuguese or Tembe, it might be hard to tell them apart. But what he's doing is listening to his own recording and then playing and then recording a translation into Portuguese right next to that. So we'll play it. And if you don't get quite what's going on, hopefully the demo will reinforce it in a moment, if I can find my mouse.
Meu pensamento era só de pescar, de comer. Cama no ralo, caçada. De matar pássaro.
Okay. So, please bear with me. It's always hard to do a great tech demo. They always kind of mess up in some way. So, wish me luck. So this is what Aikuma, the app, looks like. What you see here is a whole bunch of samples that I've created with people that I've been talking to. And we're going to create a new one. So a bunch of these are just other recordings that have been created. So just, if it's not clear yet, Aikuma just lets you record anything at all. You can record prayers, songs, speech, comedy, anything at all, and then translate it into another language. And it's pretty wide in terms of what languages you can translate into. So I have a small list here of some of the languages that are available. And what I'll do is I'll record something in English first. Oh no. Okay. Everyone say a little technology prayer. No. Okay, let's do. Well, what I can do is record over something I've already recorded. It's a little slow. So I'm going to record a couple of sentences in English. And then I'm going to just record on top of it in a language that I know, which is Spanish. Awesome. Okay. Plan B really quick. So another thing I should mention is this is only made for Android phones right now. But what I'm doing is using these simulators. They're just basically pretending to be my smartphone on my desktop. And you could actually use Aikuma like this on any computer desktop that you have, and it might actually be easier than using a tiny little mobile device. So I'm starting a different simulator to see if that will work. Okay. This one does a little floppy thing every once in a while, so forgive that. All right. So again, I'll try to record something in English. Here we go. Really simple. This is a free tool, so it doesn't look beautiful, but it does the job. All right. It's awesome to be here at the Indigenous Language Institute Symposium. I've met some great people, and some are trying out Aikuma. I'm hoping to meet a few more people. Okay, so you can imagine that being actually a beautiful story told in your language. And we can replay it here if we want. And we'll call it Conference Report. And sometimes for a story, it's helpful to take a picture of the context. If the story is about a a certain place. I love the comment from Sandra about place-based, sort of an indigenous land base, I think she put it. That's what's needed for language learning. And so this could help add to that context, but sometimes it's just, a picture of the speaker, like this one right here. Okay, I'm not gonna take a good one, but all right. So now we want to do a couple of things. The first thing I want to do is something called re-speaking. So one thing you might notice when you're doing, if you've done any documentary work or recorded any stories, the best story might be told at a loud and noisy festival, or over the dinner table when everybody's talking, or the fluent speaker might speak in a way that to a beginner it's hard to hear, or they might speak very quickly. So I'm going to look for the conference report that I just created, which should be somewhere. Here we go. And so the first thing I'm going to do is show you re-speaking. Re-speaking is our word for just repeating back slowly and very carefully. So this will help create language learning materials for people who maybe need it to go a little bit slower at first. Okay, so this is that interface that you saw before of the guy pressing and holding. So what we do is we can listen to one sentence at a time, and I'm going to slowly repeat back. And in English it's boring, but in the language you're trying to study, it's super helpful.
It's awesome to be here at the Indigenous Language Institute Symposium. I've met some great people and some...
Oops, sorry, that was a little long. So I would just do one sentence at a time, and then I would re-speak it. It's awesome to be here at the Indigenous Language Institute Symposium. And I think there was more that I let go. I have met some great people.
And some are trying out Aikuma.
And some are trying out Aikuma.
I'm hoping to meet a few more people.
I'm hoping to meet a few more people. Cool. Okay. So we can do that for every recording we make. You can do more than one re-speaking. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll translate. And actually, I'll have you come up first. You don't need to hear me speak Spanish. Let's hear someone speak Navajo really beautifully instead. No, not me. No. We've got Jennifer coming up here. Okay, so I'm going to turn the mic away because it makes it kind of crazy sounding. So Jennifer has kindly offered, or I've asked her to speak this translation in Navajo. And as you can see, I just want to show you there's a lot of languages here. There's Mescalero Apache. What other languages do we have in the room? Lakota, a couple of varieties. So just to show that there's a lot of options in the tool. Okay, and we want to deselect Spanish. Okay, so it's going to be, you're going to be speaking into here. So I'll just play my English and you'll repeat after me. If you want that nearby, you can hold it. Okay. So I'll play one sentence at a time, and she'll translate when I give her the cue into Navajo.
It's awesome to be here at the Indigenous Language Institute Symposium.
Okay, hold on.
Indigenous Language Institute Symposium
I've met some great people, and some are trying out Aikuma. I'm hoping to meet a few more people.
benata hote sinkinsen.
Let's have a round of applause. Cool. Great. So what we've done is we've created a recording, and unlike the digital voice recorders in Papua New Guinea, where they could totally be disassociated from each other, each sentence is linked to its translation. And you can imagine how this might be helpful in what Matthew Rama was talking about yesterday, creating new cultural materials, dubbing videos, creating comics, creating stuff that kids are excited by, and you could see kids doing a great job of creating these materials too. So what I want to play back is the whole thing. So I should also mention, we know that translation may not be exactly the same for each person. It also might be different for the audience you're translating for. So we could create another translation of Navajo for a different audience, or a translation of Spanish, and maybe we know, in Spanish you would say something a different way, or some more context would be needed, or something. As we learned in the Finding Nemo presentations, translation is no simple thing. So you could create other translations of Navajo. You can create as many as you want, and you could just think of them as layers of meaning. So let's see if this works.
It's awesome to be here at the Indigenous Language Institute Symposium.
Qua Indigenous Language Institute Symposium geta honetlonigi njonik.
I've met some great people, and some are trying out Aikuma.
Bela shlai dan linigi tlape de hosasin don tlae Aikuma yitantra.
I'm hoping to meet a few more people.
Tlape na da de sinkinsen.
So hopefully that's starting to make some sense. I can play back the whole recording and you can hear one sentence at a time. Eventually we're going to add video to Aikuma. You can imagine how that would be much more valuable to not only hear the words, but see the speaker, see their lips, see their gestures, see their body language. Knowing all of those things is how you really know the language too, right? It's not just the sounds you make. And I should mention here too that there's some other functionality that's possible. We have a set of standardized tags that let you indicate, the OLAC tags are the standard, what kind of speech this is. So there's dialogue, drama, formulaic, ludic means funny or comedy or playful, and so forth. Sorry for the delay here. And then finally, you can share this. By default, all the recordings that you make are private to you. You can access them on your Google Drive. This is associated with a Google account always. But they're not public. So, this is a way that we try to ensure that if there's something that is very precious or special or not for all ears to hear, it's first for you, and then you can make it public if you'd like, or, decide that you're going to do something else with these materials, put them on a website or put them on a closed, put them in your community center for people to listen to, but not for everyone to hear. And eventually we are going to make a website that allows public sharing so that what you do want to share, you will be able to share. You can also share this with other Aikuma users. So I'm thinking I want to move on to the rest of the presentation here. I'll try and go quickly because I think I have about 10 minutes left. All right. So what does Aikuma do? Just to rehash exactly what we showed. It allows recording. It allows careful repeating, which we call re-speaking. And it allows phrase-by-phrase translation. So let's move back into the language classroom here. we've seen this scene before maybe in institutional learning settings, like the gentleman mentioned a moment ago. The teacher is writing, it may be very text-based, and it may feel a little disconnected from the living language. So Aikuma is not text-based. It allows for collecting stories from elders who may be in a different kind of setting, or may be able to share wisdom in a different way than coming into a classroom and writing things down for you to learn in sort of the structured way of some classrooms we're used to. So one of the ideas that I have for the beginner is what I call oral flashcards. If someone's an early beginner, they maybe not understand full phrases yet, but you could do something like I just did, but one word at a time, and just record the translation right after it. Another thing that, if there is this lack of confidence, if there is a shyness, the re-speaking can be done in private too. A teacher could potentially send home some recordings with students, and the teacher could do the re-speaking slowly, and then the students could practice re-speaking slowly in the privacy if they feel more comfortable doing that until they're ready to speak amongst other people. And as I've mentioned, you avoid writing. Thinking about the advanced language learner, on the other hand, this person maybe is just hungry to get their hands on more language, even if they know the writing system, even if they read and write. What about more stories? What about just more examples? Aikuma can be used to help create more language materials. They can also repeat after the recorded originals, so moving between the re-spoken, slower versions to the more the fast-paced elder who tells a story. Can they repeat after that elder? That would be a good test of their knowledge. Can they practice translation into and out of English? As we saw in Finding Nemo yesterday, that's an incredible skill and takes so much work. So how well can they do with that? Can they tell their own story? And there is a focus on natural speech. So thinking about you as the language teacher, I've touched on this just thinking about the different ways that beginners and more advanced students can learn. So you can maybe create different sets of recordings for beginning and advanced students. And I mentioned the re-speaking slowly for beginners, and also this sort of flexibility of working with words, phrases, and whole stories, right? So that's all part of language. We want to start with words. We want to give beginners something to feel confident in, but we also want to really speak the natural living language and let the stories come out. And this doesn't have to be confined to the sort of institutional context or the language learning program. You can use Aikuma to just record your elders, record people around you. Someone is a fountain of wisdom and stories. Listen to them, interview them. Work together and translate this into English. Sit by your grandmother and hear her tell, I love this story. We'll get to that slide next. Oh, I don't want to jump the gun here. And then you could also be creating materials for language teachers. Aikuma is free to repeat, and it's for Android phone only. If anyone wants to see how I set up that simulation on my thing, it's all free software. So I could set it up on whatever computer you have or show you. Actually, I should probably write some instructions for how to do that. But I can tell you how to do that. And then you could use Aikuma just on your desktop even if you have an iPhone. I mentioned that you can share or keep this private. So Aikuma may not be for everyone. It may not be for all communities. But we also strongly believe, like Dr. Cajete said this morning, no technology is going to solve anything for us. It's only going to help us if we have good planning, good strategies, we have the right people, we have all of that list that you guys created this morning. So Aikuma may support language learning in these ways that I've described. It also may support it in ways that I haven't thought of that you guys are going to come up with. It may help create new creative materials like literature and video, oral literature. And it may be just one tool in the ecosystem of your work. We've seen incredible stuff in the last couple of days, so maybe you can add this to your repertoire. So this is the scene we saw yesterday, if you remember, in Derek Baxter's presentation. He talked about his mother taking the iPad and saying, oh, let me describe what bear really means. It actually means medicine carrier. It has this deeper meaning. And so this is a big part of what we really believe about translation. It's ongoing. There are many layers of meaning. And we want to be able, for Aikuma, to support this. We want to support social interactions of translation. People should be able to say, hey, why did you translate it like that? Or I wrote it this way, but in a different dialect, it's written a different way. Or spoken, I should say. Interpretation is social. I love this scene of the mother speaking to the grandchildren and saying, let me explain how this language works to you. And we're also, just as I mentioned, we're going to add video in the near future of Aikuma. So I don't think we have time for the third question. This is it. What would you do with Aikuma? Please come talk to me and tell me what you would do with Aikuma. We have a website, aikuma.org. You can download for free if you have an Android. And I really would love to talk to people. We want to know what your needs are. We want to know if you think this is useful. I'll be available at all the breaks. And I'd love to even make a recording with you. Come speak your language to me. I think that would be awesome. So that's a wrap. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm hoping to speak to a bunch more of you before we go.